Here's an experiment to begin with.
Welcome to 1 Million Experiments,
a podcast exploring how we redefine and create safety in a world without policing and prisons.
I'm Damon.
I am Kiss, and what a wonderful ride it has been here on season 3 of this podcast, the Crisis Edition.
So, there's crisis afoot.
We didn't solve it?
We did not solve all the crises. There's crisis everywhere, crisis between people, crisis in our systems and the political world. And in this time, with our partners Interrupting Criminalization, 1 Million Experiments is going deep and looking and exploring the fact that there's been an emergence of these pilots of crisis response units and hotlines and numbers and people really skilling up to meet people's needs in real time in a way that was not on our horizon just a few years ago.
Yeah, when this podcast started in the wake of the 2020 uprising, this was like actually kind of the most tangible thing that people were imagining is like a quote unquote number to call instead of the police. And we've spent this season being in conversation with projects that have emerged since that time who've been trying to figure out in their ways, in their scales, for their specific types of needs that they can meet, how they can be that number to call. Whether that's a hotline, a warm line, an in-person presence to meet people in those moments of crisis. And it's been such a joy to learn from them. And so today, we're going to take a little time together with our good pal and partner in decriminalization, Eva Nagao, who's here on the line. Hi, Eva.
Hey, guys.
To connect the dots between not just these 3 experiments, but really what we've been learning through this experience of talking to these practitioners all over this land and beyond.
And we also have one of our favorite peers here that has been peer reviewing all season with us, the one and only, the bombastic. Yeah, check that out. Deana Lewis is with us.
Woo! Thank you for... I'm so glad to be here with the 3 of you in studio and in computer.
Yeah. So shout out to all the experimenters that have been in the lab with us these past few years, but maybe there's some new folks. So let's just for a quick second, tell people what is 1 Million Experiments.
So you want to do it?
And I can do that. So in the wake of the 2020 uprising, one of the largest mobilizations in human history, there was an uptick in the political demand to divest from policing, prisons, and other carceral systems and invest those resources into community. That platform was known as Divest Invest, or shorthand defund in a lot of spaces. And our partner in decriminalization, mentor and thought leader, Mariam Kaba, like many folks, were fielding folks who were getting the question, if we're talking about moving away from these systems, what is the one thing we replace it with? And in all of her wisdom, Mariam Kaba offers, we don't need one replacement to death-making institutions. We need 1 million experiments in how we define and create safety in community and in relationship. And from there began cataloging projects, organizations, efforts, campaigns that were embodying this ethic of experimenting, embracing the beauty of failure towards moving towards new knowledge and new information. And we came in and decided to have a podcast and talk to some folks.
To learn from these experiments about what's emerged for them, the challenges they've been facing, the questions they've been asking, and how do we make those learnings useful for all of us? So after 2 seasons worth of conversations on the podcast, as well as making a film called 1 Million Experiments, we got back in the lab for season 3 to focus on this concept of crisis. How do we learn from people who've been responding to crisis in their communities as we all move through the sociopolitical crisis of this time? Eva, maybe real quick, we should just name who are the 3 experiments we talked to this season.
We are so fortunate to come full circle back into the lab to talk to our friends at REP, Relationships Evolving Possibilities, out of the Twin Cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul in Minnesota. We had Jason Soul and Rox Anderson don their lab coats and come back to give us an update on REP's emerging practice in the Midwest. We also had Dara Bayer, one of the outgoing founders from Cambridge Heart, join us from Cambridge, Massachusetts. And we had the lovely Liz Kennedy and Sherry Wonder join us from Care-Based Safety out of Ypsilanti, Michigan.
And so you can dive deep into our conversations with all 3 of these. Just go back through season 3 on the 1 Million Experiments podcast feed. But we're going to take a little time today to connect the dots, pull out some of the learnings that came from that, do our crisis conclusion convo, if you will. Will you?
I will.
All right.
Sure, I'll join.
All right, let's do it. Deana, maybe let's start with you. What are some of the strands that are connecting between these conversations?
Yeah. So I just want to start with a little bit of a personal. So I have been really dysregulated for a while. And I have been working hard to get back in sync with people and the world and just things. And so when I was listening to these episodes, I got so much joy and hope in my body. Like I wanted to cry, because since the world has gotten sicker and sicker, I've been getting more inside myself and trying to control as many things as possible. And this just reminded me that it's not about control. It's not just about individuals. It's about people. It's about being in community. It's about trust, right? And I had lost the idea of trusting people. So these 3 episodes really just, like I said, filled me with hope because of the work that they're doing, that they're still doing, that they're striving to do. And when I was listening, I thought of some words that really connected the episodes for me: adaptability, disappointment, hope, accountability, community, vulnerability, experimenting, failing, right relationship, and at the end, joy.
Let's start by zooming in on one of those. Let's talk adaptability, because I think that really shines through. All 3 of these experiments have been working in various ways for at least a few years now, and have had to try to figure out how to move through different political realities, different like on the ground realities, and then like different capacities as a group of people trying to make change together. What had you thinking about the idea of adaptability?
So I'm going to go back to funding, and thinking about funding and how these 3 organizations were doing work without funding. And then in this new era that we were in, they got some funding. And now in this political time, that funding is being threatened. And I wanted to start with funding partially because it's important, partially to point out that the first part of what I said is that they were doing this work, this community labor, without funding before. And because of their commitment and efforts, if they lose funding, and I hope they don't, and we'll talk about how to support these different organizations. But if they do, I'm sure that they'll be on the ground, or people will be on the ground still doing the work, which is also to say that we need to give these folks money. These folks need money. But I want to talk about the inequity of funding, especially with state funding, and how even when the state, and when I say state, I mean the actual state, I mean federal, and I also mean local government. So that when they put out these different grants for different organizations to apply to fund their programs, they might sound really great and perfect for the program, but if you don't have grant writers, then you might not be able to apply. If the money comes in reimbursement, that doesn't work.
Which means you have to have the money already to spend, and then you could get that back.
Absolutely.
Yeah, think about if you knew a guy who was like, yeah, can you just do this really complicated thing? I'll get you back. Don't worry. I'll get you back.
Exactly.
You'd be like, no, maybe a little 50-50 up front. We could work some sort of deal out, but no, we're not doing that.
Yeah, exactly.
And it leaves you vulnerable to that money then being pulled after you've already spent it, which is what we've seen with the federal government in this season. So many of these grants that the Trump administration has pulled have been reimbursement grants, so people and organizations had already spent that money counting on getting it.
Exactly.
And I think about these organizations, I feel like it's an obstacle course, and they're pivoting, they're dodging these cones, they're trying to get us to the finish line, they're doing everything they can to make it. They're like, they're selling the hoodies out of the car, they're applying for the grants as best they can, they're crowdsourcing, they're crowdfunding. And I think about what Damon said, bringing us back to the hypothesis, bringing us back to the beginning of 1 million experiments, about showcasing these snapshots of community-based safety, having these brave and vulnerable people come onto the podcast to talk about their experiments, their successes, and their failures. And just like how adaptability is a through line through all of that work, adaptability in funding, adaptability in services. I loved this season where Sherry and Liz said this beautiful thing. They said, we start by listening. And admittedly, I wrote this down as a funny thing because I was like, oh, I'm going to tell our podcast listeners you start by listening. But like, honestly, like,
Actually,
you
you start by subscribing wherever you get your podcast.
wherever you get your podcast. But it's just, you start by listening. And I think, okay, so we started in 2020. Here are 3 different places, 3 different groups of people, 3 different methods. And we do end up at similar conclusions. We have place-based, very hyper-local organizing. We have people, we have warm lines, we have hot lines, we have just like ways to like these concentric, we have these concentric circles like growing out from these like one-on-one relationships to these groups, to these communities, to these neighborhoods, to these cities. We see this growing. And all through that is listening and adaptability. It's people really moving with the times. It's being allowed to try things, being given the room, the space, the money for admittedly not all these 5 years. I mean, we hear about how that's been a real restriction, but we see them dodging these cones. We see them still going. I think that the adaptability brings me to, here's some alliteration for you all, to how this is accompaniment. In order to accompany people, I mean, Jason and Rox talk about this in the episode with Rep. In order to do this work, in order to accompany people through crisis, you have to be adaptable. Like, that is the thing. That is why this death-making institution of police, prisons, and surveillance, that's not... Like, let me roll that back. There is some adapting going on there, but it's not adapting to the needs of the people. Experiments are that. We are adapting in real time so that we can accompany each other to a place where we have more care, more safety, more like radical liberation.
Yeah, I love this honing in on adaptability. And even as you were talking about dodging the obstacles, I was envisioning like whitewater rafting around some big stones, or the
Okay, outdoorsy Damon.
Yeah.
I know, what was that?
Yeah, it's really, that was a pull from the animated series Avatar. That was like one of the challenges, like the rites of passages, like they had to recreate the
Okay,
ice.
cinephile Damon.
Yeah. But that point you just ended on like is really resonating for me. Like, not only is the adaptability a necessity because we have finite resources and capacity, and there's also like the obstacle of a status quo that does not want what we want, right? So we have to like maneuver that, but also our adaptability and our nimbleness is an advantage, right? Like the size of the bureaucracy, the difference between being able to whitewater raft and being on the Titanic, right? Like, there is a way in which even when they want to, the carceral state can't shift course, can't readjust, can't change the scale. Like, they have to be what they are in a sense. And that's pretty stagnant and unresponsive to real needs. So even something like, we're going to figure out the hours where we are most available and most effective is a type of adaptation to going from, emergency rapid response crisis to maneuvering through systems to back to emergency, right? To be able to evaluate what's working well, to be able to evaluate what's working well and what isn't, and to change course in a way that's needed. That's actually a strength that we have, that the state does not have that same nimbleness, even if they wanted to. And I think that's something we should like lean into as we're building up our fabrics.
Yeah, they can adapt the structures of harm to be more harmful, or to some degree slightly less harmful, but they can't change what they are and what they do.
Yeah.
Like, if you are a prison, you are a prison.
Yeah.
And so that makes me think about the time that we're having this season in and why we wanted to focus on crisis. For a bunch of partners in decriminalization, we are living through a time of like rampant increase in criminalization in ways that actually might not be fully new, but are on a different scale.
Yeah. But I mean, it could be argued the most rampant increase in history. Like, there has never been a scaling up, like particularly what we saw in, the legislation of the big, beautiful, ugly bill.
Yeah, the Beeble. And so I think with that, it's a little tempting actually to be like, well, these experiments are a relic of a time of possibility after uprising, and now we need to maybe be viewing things differently because the carceral state is scaling up in a different way. And I'm not quite sure where I land on that, like, or how these experiments fit in this new landscape. What I do know is useful is the lessons of the people trying to keep each other safe in those experiments that we can now all take in the ways that we're responding to the crisis of this time. But I'm curious for y'all, we asked this throughout the season, what are y'all taking to help you move through the crisis of emergent and ascendant fascism from the experiments that maybe built their foundations 2-3 years ago at a different point in that trajectory? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That reminds me of why 1 million experiments exists. People have been doing this work underground, above ground for years and years. And that's important to understand, and that we need to be in study. We need to understand that these groups or different organizations or people have been doing this type of, like you said, insurgent work for a long period of time, and will continue to. So I think about an episode of the podcast I host.
Cut that out.
Stories for power. Stories for power. And in one of the episodes, one of our guests, who is an amazing organizer, talked about the work that they were doing in New York right after 9/11. But what she was describing was the lockdown of the entire state, and that it was an absolute just surveillance state to the nth degree. And in that time, the work that they were doing could be and would be and is criminalized. And so they continued the work under the threat of the surveillance state, under the threat of criminalization, under the threat of being jailed or imprisoned. Similarly to today, the surveillance and the fascism might look a little bit different, but the work is still happening. It just might not be as visible as it was in the past few years.
Yeah, it's one of actually the great contradictions of our work is that we're doing all this like platforming and visibilizing of people doing this grassroots work. And sometimes that's helpful, and sometimes that's actually not what's most helpful in order to make that work succeed,
And I think we come back again and again to the hyper-local, but for that reason, like you look around. I mean, look around you. I think that when we were stuck in our houses in 2020, when we started this podcast adventure, for 1 second, it resonated people with to look around. Keep looking like that. We need to continue to go back to the basics, and we need to understand and meet the needs of our communities that we are present in, like physically. I'm sitting here and my mind is reeling, like, what do I want to say about how we meet the needs of the day and how these are different from the threats of the past and things we've experienced in our lifetimes and learned from the lifetimes that have gone before us. And I don't for a minute want to discount these emergent rapid crisis responses. But I think I heard a little bit of this in what Deana's saying and what we've been saying throughout this season, which is that these are long-term projects. These are, the success of these projects of REP, of Cambridge Heart, of Care-Based Safety, it wasn't some random group of people who got together on a corner, although we have seen those projects. I'm not saying don't start that group. I'm just saying that is a beginning, and it doesn't go from that group necessarily like straight to warm line, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's like years and years of building and relationship building. And so do we need to put out the fire on the house next to us right now? Absolutely. And is it going to require, as Deana said a couple episodes back, like more time and more energy to meet these threats? Like, absolutely. We have to be putting the house out. We have to be putting the fire out on the house next to ours, and we need to be hydrating, right? Like we need to be hydrating our movements, our communities, our relationships. And I think ourselves. I mean, right now, everyone take a drink. Okay, pause. But when I think about fascism, and I am by no means like your expert on like how we are going to tackle this era, but I will say one of the things that Liz and Sherry said that really stood out to me, that was a great reminder for me, is one of the things that we're doing in these response models is we are fighting back tooth and nail to a culture of disposability. Fascism writ large is a culture of disposability. It's a culture of disposability of like humans, right? Of humanity. And so I think that we are experimenting, and we want room to fail, and we want room to fly. And we have to remember that no matter what, we need to stay this course. And that means not leaving our people behind. We have to, the way that we're fighting this moment is knowing that we need to sustain ourselves and movement for a long haul, that we have to have emergent firefighters, and that we really need to keep an eye on all of these experiments and continue supporting these experiments growing from that corner up to like these scales that are going to meet the needs today.
Yeah. Eva and Deana, y'all are both like speaking to things that I'm feeling so profoundly right now. One, I just want to like, in the moment that we're talking about fascism, want to like recenter the celebratory feeling that I have coming out of this season of, again, it needs to be named that like, this is not the entire landscape. These are our 3 microcosms or 3 examples that all over the country, it's not just people doing good work. People are actually showing up to respond to people's needs at the time where it's needed the most.
There are mariachi bands at the Ice Hotel, people. You think those people aren't involved in their communities?
And so many people dreamed of this reality, right? And so I just want to like, my least favorite political tendency is like, nobody's doing this. Nobody's doing nothing. Ain't nobody doing nothing out there. And I just want to celebrate, like, before we get into all of the failings of the specifics, people are doing the work. And even that language of, you know, the work in the spirit of accompaniment. I think what this season also highlighted is something that can feel a little bit like a cliche of like, there are these explicit forward-facing political projects that we want to have, that we want to commit to, that we call the work. And then there's also this interior wrestling of like, one, just being a human, but particularly being a human navigating oppressive systems, and like moving through that is the work. And sometimes that has come up as a tension for people. Like, I'm the on the ground person, I'm the healing and transformation and restoration. And what these 3 experiments all said, this is probably the thing that was the most uniform, is like, those things are inextricably linked towards the world we want to build. So you can go over and just be nose to the ground and do 1 million programs and have 1 million data reports. But if you're not actually wrestling with how you're showing up, you can be perpetuating harm, or you can be co-opted or absorbed into the state apparatus and not actually building us towards liberation. Or you can just do your breath work and your somatics and just do yoga, and like, shout out to all of those things as well. But if that's not connected to community, then that is a little bit separate. And so this legibility of, they all said, you cannot show up to crisis if you do not know how you will respond, if you have not checked in with your own triggers, if you have not done your breath work. And that's what we're offering to people. And so, yeah, just making that both and, which is like, again, not a brand new conclusion. It's somewhat obvious.
This just in breathing. No, but I hear you.
But breathing in this, the face of like, how do we show up when our neighbors are fighting each other, you know? And that is just such a prevalent thing to hear from people who aren't saying it for the clicks or for the likes. Like, no, this is what we're doing.
And it's the only way this works.
Right.
It's not to be cute and put 2 things together. We've seen through our experimentation what happens if we don't do that breath, and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so it's a necessity as part of this experimentation, as part of the process that we've learned.
Yeah. And the things aren't complex, right? Like, you do have to train or skill up, but, you know, what Jay said is like, we're bringing water, we're bringing cigs, you know, even if that has its own contradictions. We're bringing, you know, a little cutie fruit orange or something, you know. It's not rocket science, you know, it's not some new super complex theoretical doctrine, but it is hard.
Right.
And it is heavy and it is difficult, right? So there's a simplicity to this accompaniment, like y'all named, but it requires a lot of you, particularly to do it over a long period of time. And to your point, Eva, 1 Million Experiments was on the road for a lot of the last year, and there's a lot of people who are eager and like want to get started, and it's like, I want to get started, and it's like, yeah, do it. And pretty much none of these experiments were people's entry point, right? Like, there were previous experiments that led into this, or that skilled up, or that made the vision for building a crisis response or a hotline possible. And so for folks who are interested in abolition, for folks who are interested in movement work, the like, just get started, just find your people, just do the work. You don't have to figure out your perfect container as your first step. Enter a container, and from there you can meet the people that then maybe you have a 10-year commitment with, and you can build that crisis response, which is the thing that so many people want to be doing.
Yeah, the simplicity of the response. It could be easy to say like, well, that works for that kind of interpersonal crisis, but how's that going to work, when we're talking about like military presence in our communities and people being hauled away? But it's actually the same.
Yeah.
Showing up with water, showing up with breath, showing up
Mhm.
with physical presence.
Mhm.
I'd say a small mandarin orange will be helpful in that moment too.
Well,
But being ready to have the call.
Yeah.
it goes back to what Deana was saying, and I'm jumping in front of line here, but those big times, those big moments, those opportunities and openings that we have against the state are not going to be useful to us if we haven't already built trust into our
Mhm.
movements.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And those big opportunities are bound to come, right? Like these things move in some sort of cycle. And so there are these little windows, and like we need to take advantage of those windows that may provide funding, they may provide a research template, that may provide staffing that you wouldn't have. But also like these three examples are clear that that is not something we can rely on, put our faith in, or expect to be happening in good faith, right? Like
Mhm.
the state, in addition to like all of its oppression plans, also just like has a PR aspect of it. And so
Mhm.
sometimes our things will become popular for a moment and they will try to cozy up next to it. And we have to have some discernment of like, how can we take advantage of this opportunity, but know that like they are not our collaborators or our partners, our co-conspirators in building this liberatory framework. Even if it's not from an evil standpoint or a suppression, they're just going to have other budgetary focuses or use that political will towards something else because they're moving through that cycle.
Yeah, we need to have a multi-level approach or multi-level approaches. You also were kind of alluding to this, that it's the psychological and emotional toll that some of this work and the work that these three organizations are doing can take on a person
Mhm.
can lead to burnout really, really easily
Yeah.
if we're just grinding.
Yeah.
And we are in a culture, we've been socialized to just grind.
Mhm.
And
Do you know how hard I'm trying not to do the grind and beat on the table right now?
and there was your opening. And it's so harmful. It's harmful to our physical bodies. It's harmful to our minds. It's harmful to our emotions, harmful to
It
everything.
enables us being harmful to other people.
Right. Yeah. So if we're not taking care of ourselves, like I said, if we are getting sick along with the world, then we're going to end up just creating more harm in our communities. And so one of the things that I heard from the groups was bringing joy, right? And joy in different ways to the work, to their lives, so that they can continue to be in the streets, to be with the people, to accompany. And I think it's so important, and a lesson that I had to learn
Mhm.
and am still learning and trying to understand, is that if we're only feeding the work, and we're not feeding the levity, the
Mhm.
rest, the have fun, the be with family, friends, etc., then we're doing a disservice to the movement and to our communities.
And sometimes the people who we do the experimentation with are not actually going to be the people that we create that joyful space with.
Mm-hmm.
And that sometimes I think creates tension because there's this expectation that that will be the space for both. And sometimes that can bring fulfillment and connection, but you got to be able to assess for yourself, like actually what does regenerate it so that it's easier for me in that moment to be able to take the deep breath to meet
Mhm.
someone's need.
Mm-hmm. That kind of tends to something else I was picking up from the season, is that like what I hear is like allowing things to happen in other spaces. I feel like all of these organizations weren't very proprietary, right? Like one, just like the notion of coming on the show and sharing their results and sharing their findings, but you hear them naming like, and we're building these trainings to build up these skills and capacity in our community, not to build up the strength of just our organization, right? And so one, you may learn something from another container that then can translate somewhere else. But I think, again, back to that rep example of like, we've trained, I don't know how many thousands of people they said, and like the day before we were sitting down with them in Minneapolis, ICE was raiding a restaurant, and it wasn't just people who were on their core team or, you know, on their hotline response, but they recognized so many people that had came through and engaged their trainings that were at this space. And so like to this point of the things that we are going to need to show up for our community needs will also need to be translated to resist state violence, militarization, and the things that are to come are the same processes, and that's something that's like, when done at its best, like common source.
Yeah, it's part of the thing that's hard to remember in this season, in the season of life, not of the podcast, is that the ascendance of the harm doesn't negate the skilling up of just like random ass people from 5 years ago. That there are so many more people who have a grounding, who have a politic, and who have like a knowledge of, oh, this is a place that I can be to try to help my neighbors. Like, people got those skills, and those skills are there whether they're being used or not on a day-to-day basis right now. And so I try to take some solace in that, of like, actually, we in the larger we are better equipped now than we were 5 years ago to meet this moment.
And I'm going to bring us back to the spreadsheet that was the genesis of 1 Million Experiments. You know, 1 Million Experiments started as a list of projects, links, pictures, news articles. Like, here are the people doing the things that we talk about. Here is abolition happening. You know, whether people are calling it abolition or not, this is something that we can imagine as part of this project of liberation. And so when we started the site and the podcast for 1 Million Experiments, it was in direct response to calls, to pleas for people who are talking with municipal government, who are talking with like hyperlocal solutions to do emergency crisis response. But in Miriam's extremely, you know, brilliant chess game of a mind, you know, we heard this plea and met that need in 2020 and are continuing to do that. But it was because it felt like we were caught out on the back foot. Like, the list didn't already exist. The podcast didn't already exist. So we weren't just doing it so that fall we could come to city council and say, here's the list you were asking for. We did it so that 20 years from now, the people who are listening to this podcast, children, like, know that this has been building and building and building, that these skills, that the database, that the collection has been building, that this collective knowledge is growing in a little bit more of a visible way. We are learning from those mistakes, but it is with a long game in mind. And I think that this makes sense in my head. And so you all tell me if this makes sense as a connecting the dots piece too. But I think, you know, we laud people for their vulnerability in coming in here and the vulnerability of experimenting a lot. I don't know if I've said this out loud before, but one of the other connecting threads for our guests this season and all the seasons prior on 1 Million Experiments is just this, like, the movers, the shakers, the doers, the logisticators, shout out to Deana, like, these people, the people who are in it for that long game, I think have an incredible lack of hubris. Like, you are, like, it is just a massive leap to skill up, to decide to put in the dedication and commitment that our guests are putting into their communities. These are the people who are coming before the meeting with the snacks, putting out the chairs, who are staying after, putting the chairs back, doing the social media posts, cleaning up the space, taking the snacks to their friends out.
It's mostly a snack-based responsibility, is what I'm hearing.
It truly, I mean, once again, hydrate and snack, people. Take this.
I think you're getting hungry also, is what I'm hearing.
But, you know, it's just, it is like this is deep, deep commitment and deep work. And the snacks are a joke and the snacks are the thing.
Yeah, just at risk of being redundant as we close out these conclusions, I just want to,
As we conclude our
our concluding,
At the end.
at the end of the
at the
film.
risk of being redundant.
Yeah. But just want to celebrate again, right? In 2020, it's estimated somewhere to 20 to 40 million people around the world activated and took to the streets. And that was not only just historically significant, it led to so much. I think many have maybe absorbed or even thought themselves that, like, oh, that was all for nothing, or that was a fleeting moment. But out of that, in connection of that, because of that, before that, so many people across the country have been doing mutual aid and feeding people, have been doing arts programming, have been doing policy work, have been doing research, have been building data, have been creating containers for the unhoused, have been doing healthcare work, and now
Have been literally getting people free.
have been building bail funds and bond funds all over the country. And now we have these 3 examples, but there are even more. There are folks who are dedicating their lives to build the infrastructure to respond to harm beyond the harmful systems that were given to us. And that is something that we need to just like breathe in and accept and celebrate, and know that that actually creates more of an opportunity and invitation for anybody listening, anybody watching, to step in and to do that work too. And so there is so much burning, there is so much being destroyed and dismantled, but there was so much being built that for most of us, it is not legible. And so it can feel like there's just this one-sided trajectory of destruction happening in our world. But there are millions of people literally experimenting towards defining what safety, what community, what protection looks like. And that's something we should be very proud of.
Yeah, everywhere the world is burning, and all around me are people trying to help each other.
Mm-hmm.
That's a Merriam quote.
It's just true.
Okay, I was.
It was her quoting somebody else.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's so deep.
I do remember.
That was a good one.
Yeah.
I did want to say something. I feel like I had something in my head, and I kind of want to say it out loud, but we can just maybe I'll just think about it.
No, you can say it if you want.
Yeah.
This is the space. We got mics.
Right, temporarily. I really hear what you're saying, Damon, too. I think that one of the things that has come up in this season is there is real visible work and there's real invisible work. And there are reasons for that. And I think, we've uplifted so many different great projects in this. And part of that is to provide these examples, to provide inspiration, to provide catharsis for people who are on the ground doing this work and can feel a little bit less alone. But I think, too, that one of the threads that we came across with these 3 organizations is, this provability, this like proof of concept that, everyone's experimenting in the lab, but that we have to prove it works. Like that's, what we're doing with funders. That's sometimes what we're doing with community buy-in. And I just I want to leave this season with a sense of like really thinking deeply in our radical imaginations about like what we're not seeing. And it brings me back. Like I have this picture in my head that we're all in Chicago and we're with Tamar. Do y'all remember Tamar's episode with Mask?
Episode 4.
Episode 4, the mothers and men against senseless killings. And, I kept talking about like the people in the corner. Like Mask are the people in the corner. This is the project that's, is like, let us respond to violence in our communities by being present. Let us respond to violence in our communities with snacks, with hot dogs and pizzas and barbecues and joy and life where there has been senseless killing. And so I think, there's no way to say how much violence, how much harm that Tamar and that group has stopped. But it is such like an evocative image for me to think of them right now somewhere sitting on that corner, enacting joy, eating food together, breaking bread, having these tough conversations. And for me, like, I just want to leave us with that picture. Like, these are just these snapshots of what abolition looks like. We don't know where it's going, but it's really important that we stay on that corner.
Beautiful.
Another mic drop moment.
That was awesome.
Yeah.
All right, let's get out of here.
We got to do the plugs.
It has been such a joy to spend season 3 with both of y'all. Deana, how can folks find your work in the ways you'd like it to be found?
You can find us on your nearest podcast listening app, device, site, whatever. It's called Stories for Power. I am the host. We go through about 25 years of the architects and radical organizers who have and are working on community accountability, transformative justice, and abolitionist practices.
Beautiful. So definitely make sure you subscribe to that. You can find all of 1 Million Experiments, the podcast, on those same podcast spots. Make sure you watch the 1 Million Experiments film on Google Play, Apple TV, YouTube Movies. Keep an eye out for 1 Million Experiments in the Field, our new travel show from Respair coming this fall on the Respair Production and Media YouTube page. And all of our work at
www.
Oh, thank you for that. People were going to be lost without that.
Need those
You need
W's.
the W's.
What happened to the HTTPS?
Yes, exactly.
Slash.
Get the backslashes in quick. And you can find all of our work at respairmedia.com. Eva, where can folks find Interrupting Criminalization?
You can always find us at interruptingcriminalization.org and at interruptcrim on social.
Make sure you go to millionexperiments.com to see the incredible rich resource that started this juggernaut that we've all built together. And please submit your experiments that you're a part of, that you see in your community, on that millionexperiments.com website under Submit Your Experiment. And hoping to find y'all back in the lab again soon.
Much love to the people.
Peace.
Bye.
Excellent.
That's a season.